Welcome to episode 46. I'm Stuart McCullough, I'm the CEO of VHIA. I'm starting with this week's industrial roundup, and in particular with regards to the proposed agreement for medical scientists. Big thanks to those members who have managed to complete the NERR process in such good time. It's greatly appreciated. We are committed to making sure that that agreement is reballoted and at the Commission and approved and operating prior to Christmas. I do want to draw members' attention to Salary Circular 681. Salary Circular 681 contains the allowances as well as the wage rates for the proposed medical scientists agreement. Members will have also received a hospital circular from the Department of Health and Human Services. I would urge all members to take the necessary preparations and calculations to give effect to the increases and the back pay with respect to the medical scientists agreement in accordance with that salary circular and in accordance with the hospital circular from DHHS. In terms of bargaining for community health, which is ongoing, thank you to those members who provided feedback recently with regards to the update of the social and community services agreement. We are almost at the end. With respect to health professionals, we are scheduled to meet with VHIA again on Tuesday the 28th of November to progress bargaining for that group. Updates of that meeting will be provided through the VHA community app. And for health and allied, VHA has met with the HWU on the 22nd of November to again progress bargaining for health and allied services staff employed within standalone community health. There has been some preliminary feedback from the HWU, and a further discussion is scheduled for Monday the 11th of December. Moving to our health services, thank you to those rural and regional members who attended the Warrenmang session on Friday the 23rd of November. It's always one of our favourite days in the calendar and a great opportunity for us to catch up with you and to field your questions. In terms of AMA bargaining, we both have twice weekly bargaining, which is ongoing, as well as a meeting of our reference group once per fortnight. Those meetings are summarised through the community app, and that provides a valuable opportunity for people to provide their feedback as those negotiations near their end. In terms of the Health and Allied Services Agreement, and in particular the SDP-PWG, the VHA has met with the HWU on the 22nd of November, and the parties have agreed to prioritise the implementation of the security and patient transport reviews. Members will shortly receive a bulletin requesting feedback with regards to those matters, and a summary of the meeting has been published. In terms of the Nurses and Midwives Agreement, VHA attended a meeting of the OH&S Industry Working Group on the 22nd of November. On the 23rd of November, VHA attended the SDP-PWG at the ANMF offices. For our mental health agreement, there is a EBA reference group meeting on the 27th of November. For the dental services EBA reference group, the reference group is meeting also on the 27th of November. For the health professionals EBA reference group, that is meeting on the 29th of November. And with respect to the general dentists and specialists bargaining, VHA has met with representatives of Professionals Australia on Wednesday the 29th of November to progress bargaining. Updates for all those meetings are available through the VHA community app. And just a reminder that the end-of-year VHA podcast quiz is still available, still open for entries. We will be announcing the winners at each of the HRIR meetings in December. That is for the Metro on the first week, the first Wednesday of December, for rural and regional on the second Wednesday of December, and we will then also announce the winner for our community health members. And that's it for this week's Industrial Roundup. Welcome to the weekly update, where we go in depth with a particular subject. And joining me for this week's discussion is Senior Workplace Relations Consultant and the possessor of a Movember moustache that truly is an act of charity, Daniel Pullin. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Stuart.
Daniel, would you be kind enough to reveal a clue for this week's discussion?
Of course.
So, for the benefit of those members who are listening to this podcast rather than watching, could you describe the object?
It's a shiny disco ball.
And based on that clue, what would you say the subject for our discussion today will be?
Uniform allowance, flares, and everything that is 80s.
Daniel, you couldn't be more wrong. Today's subject is we're talking about Christmas. In particular, we're talking about workplace functions. So Christmas is a joyous time of year, but if you're in the field of human resources, it must be regarded as one of the most dangerous times of year because that's the time of year when things can get seriously pear-shaped. So as the festive season approaches, we're going to spend today going through a few case studies concerning events associated with Yuletide.
Wonderful.
So to get that started, you can put that down and I will say, Happy Kris Kringle to you. Would you care to open it?
Thank you, Stuart.
I'm not going to be offended by the fact that you have got me nothing.
I didn't know we were doing gifts today.
The element of surprise is an important part of Kris Kringle, Daniel. I'm impressed by the degree of care that you're taking. So Daniel, you should perhaps turn that around to show our audience the object that you've received. And that provides a very neat and efficient segue into the first part of our discussion about workplace functions in the Yuletide season, Secret Santa.
So Stuart, on that note, what are the hazards with Secret Santa?
In broad terms, the risk lies in anonymity. For some strange reason, when people do things anonymously, they will sometimes do things they wouldn't ordinarily do or say things they wouldn't ordinarily say. And
what would be some examples of that?
I think everybody will have had an experience in terms of anonymous surveys where that has been the case. The other great example, of course, is just the internet generally, where people say the most incredibly ghastly things under the cloak of anonymity.
So what do you suggest?
Make sure that somebody knows who's responsible for giving a gift to another person. Secret Santa means that it only needs to be a secret from the recipient of the gift, not from the person who's running the entire process.
So why does it matter?
Because the rules of employment still apply. The policies of the employer are still relevant. That includes the equal opportunity policy, includes the sexual harassment policy, it includes the OH&S policy and the workplace bullying policy.
So how would OH&S and bullying come up?
So just on that note, it's worth remembering that workplace bullying is an iteration of an occupational health and safety issue. It is an occupational health and safety issue. And whilst it may not be repeated conduct, the giving of a particular gift, it may form part of a pattern of conduct, it may not. It may still be an occupational health and safety risk. It may have an occupational health and safety impact on the recipient.
You mean if I ask for an iPhone and get 2 tin cans and a piece of string?
Under those circumstances, I think that would be fair enough. But we're talking about a circumstance where the gift relays some kind of message, some kind of message to the recipient about what the giver thinks about that person or thinks about their work.
Right. How would that be the circumstance?
So this wasn't a decision as such, but there was an article a couple of years ago in the newspaper that concerned an employee of the Federal Finance Department, and his Kris Kringle gift was a plastic reindeer.
That doesn't sound so bad.
It gets worse. When you pressed the tail, a chocolate dropping popped out, and someone had handwritten the words, Luan's modelling kit.
That's terrible. Should Kris Kringle be banned?
It doesn't need to be banned, but it's worth reminding people that the employer's values in terms of respect still apply to all circumstances. That particular employee, his job was economic modelling. And so what the person was suggesting is that they didn't think much of his work performance.
Right. So what about work functions?
So what we might do at this point is we might talk about a number of decisions of the Fair Work Commission that go to the issue of workplace functions, and we're going to try and focus on some key lessons that arise out of those decisions. However, I've got to say that we are going to be talking about employee misconduct. And because we're talking about employee misconduct at functions, it does mean that there may be some element of vulgar language. So to help us combat that, I brought along this for you to hold. And when we get to anything that's unsuitable for broadcast, I'm going to get you to ding that triangle.
Okay.
If you think you're up to it.
I think I'm up to it.
Okay. In terms of the 3 case studies that we are going to be doing, they do have one thing in common.
Is it Christmas?
They have 2 things in common. Both Christmas, the other thing they have in common is alcohol. And that's a fairly interesting issue in the sense that in a broad sense, being intoxicated at work is serious misconduct. The Fair Work regulations at Regulation 1.07 define serious misconduct to include intoxication. However, in the context of a workplace function, around Christmas, for example, it may well be that that alcohol consumption is condoned. It may even be that alcohol is supplied by the employer. So it's a bit different to the normal circumstance.
So what is the first case?
So it's a decision from 2015, Keenan and Leighton Borrell Amy New South Wales Proprietary Limited. The citation is, in brackets, 2015 FWC 3156.
And what happened in that case?
So the applicant was a team leader. The employees went to a Christmas party. The Christmas party was conducted at an off-site location, namely a Novotel in Sydney. It was booked between 6 and 10 p.m.
Is the time important?
It will be.
Right. So what happens next?
So alcoholic drinks, namely beer and wine and some mixed drinks, were served by waiting staff to staff members, along with some light food. That was the way it was supposed to work. That is, the hotel staff were to be serving the drinks.
That sounds fine. Did something go wrong?
So at some point during the evening, the guests were able to serve themselves bottles of beer from a large container.
Right. So what happened to Mr. Keenan?
Mr. Keenan became intoxicated.
Right. Was he in trouble for being intoxicated?
So that wasn't the issue. The issue was his conduct whilst he was intoxicated.
And what happened?
Quite a lot. You're going to have that triangle ready. It was claimed that Mr. Keenan told a director of the company and a senior project manager to off, and asked a female employee for her phone number. He was aggressive towards another, more junior employee, posing the question, who the are you, and what do you even do here?
So they're difficult questions to answer at the best of times.
It was also put that this was done in an aggressive, intimidating and bullying manner.
All right, so then what?
So we get to 10 p.m. and the function ends, and as is often the case, some people from the function decided to continue their celebrations.
So at that point, the work function finished and a private function commenced?
That's right. So what's happened in the first instance is that they've left the function room that has been booked by the company and have moved to the public bar of the hotel.
I'm afraid to ask, but then what happened?
He referred to a female colleague as he kissed another colleague without invitation before telling her that he was going home to dream about her. Then what happened was that the rest of the employees decided to leave that hotel.
Did he go with them?
He did, but he was then refused entry at the next venue.
And was he dismissed?
He was dismissed by the company, and he put in then an unfair dismissal claim.
Right, so what did the Commission find?
So the first point to note is that the Commissioner, His Honour, found that the Commission could only consider those events that occurred during the official work function.
So between the hours of 6 and 10 p.m. in the function room and not afterwards?
Not the conduct at the public bar, that's
Right.
correct.
So does that mean out-of-hours misconduct can never constitute misconduct?
No, it doesn't. So out-of-hours conduct can, in certain circumstances, constitute misconduct. The relevant principles go back to a decision called Rose and Telstra. For out-of-hours conduct to constitute misconduct for employment, it's got to include things such as conduct that, viewed objectively, is likely to cause serious damage to the employee-employer relationship, conduct that damages the employer's interests, conduct that is incompatible with the employee's duty as an employee. And
the conduct in the front bar didn't meet those expectations?
Yeah, not according to the decision. So what happened was that His Honour described the after party as though it were essentially a private social setting, albeit one that involved people who had a common interest in the fact that they worked together and had just attended an official Christmas function. So just respectfully, I would query that finding. Obviously, the Commission is in the best place to judge these things, but I think it is worth testing that a little bit or prodding that a little bit further. When you look at Rose and Telstra and the issue of conduct that may constitute misconduct that occurs out of hours. Very often, conduct that occurs in those circumstances will have an adverse impact on other employees. And in my own view, that adverse impact could activate those rules in Rose and Telstra and make that a work issue. It's easy to imagine how some of that conduct described as occurring in the front bar could have a profound workplace impact, particularly if you're with respect to the comments and then the uninvited display of affection. Those could have serious repercussions for that other person, may have an impact on that person, and it's very easy to see that that could then have profound impacts at the workplace.
But the function itself was out of hours.
Yeah, it was, but that wasn't a problem. So it was still work conduct in those circumstances. It was also noted by the Commission that the company's code of conduct and policies was such that they didn't suggest that that kind of conduct could be relevant, the policies didn't suggest that they could reach to an unofficial after party.
Right. So is that always the case?
So there's an exception that springs to mind. So whilst out-of-hours conduct may or may not be misconduct for the purposes of employment, it does not mean that the employer may not be liable for that conduct.
So what do you mean by that?
Sexual harassment is the obvious example. So sexual harassment is prohibited by the Equal Opportunity Act. It prohibits one employee from sexually harassing another employee. It is not confined to the workplace or workplace hours as such. And what that means is that it could be that an employee who is on the receiving end of the kind of conduct that was described in this case could be able to make a claim against the employer. So on the one hand, the employer may be limited in terms of its scope to hold an employee accountable for their conduct in an out-of-hours setting, but the employer could potentially be held liable with respect to that same conduct.
So what does that mean for employers?
I think it means that employers should not turn a blind eye to after parties. What happens there could be relevant to the workplace. People should be reminded to treat their colleagues with respect no matter what the environment.
So what did His Honour find in terms of the applicant?
So there's a bit of a twist. So I described before that the applicant used some pretty terse language when speaking to a range of employees. Interestingly, in terms of those employees, they were complete gamut. They ran the gamut in terms of seniority, from someone who was a director of the company down to somebody who was more junior as such. So he's indiscriminate in that sense. When the company went to put the allegation to him, they shied away from describing the actual language that was used.
Well, how so?
So what they said is that he had described certain managers in offensive terms and asked if he recalled any other interactions that made the female employee feel uncomfortable.
So what do we take from that?
Be direct when you're describing the language in an allegation. Don't be shy. You've got to provide enough information and be specific enough to give the person a fair opportunity to respond to the allegation. And perhaps in this instance, by avoiding language that was no doubt ugly, they've been too obscure in the way that they've put the allegation.
So what about the alcohol issue?
So His Honour the Commission described the provision of the alcohol as a mitigating factor, but it did not mean that the applicant had divested himself of responsibility for his actions simply because he was intoxicated. The Commission took into account the fact that at a certain point, the employees were able to help themselves. That is, particular weight has been attributed to the fact of that self-service component in terms of alcohol, and in a limited way, that weighed in favour of the dismissal being harsh.
Right. So what was the decision of the Commission?
So in this particular instance, it was found that the dismissal was unfair.
Right. What about case study number 2?
So case study number 2 is a decision from the Fair Work Commission from last year. It's a decision called McDade and Future Engineering and Communications Proprietary Limited. The citation for those people who are interested are 2016 FWC 343.
And what happened in that circumstance?
Again, it's a Christmas function and an afternoon of go-karting is then followed by a function on the employer's premises.
And was there alcohol involved?
Yeah, there was. And importantly, there were no controls over the amount of alcohol that can be consumed by individual employees.
So that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It certainly was, and you'll need to have that triangle ready. It was claimed that the employee became aggressive towards a number of employees. It was said that he gave another employee a hard time about work matters before pushing the fully clothed employee into a pool. He then told somebody else to off and also had a physical altercation with another employee that left that other employee with some minor injuries.
Was he dismissed?
Perhaps unsurprisingly, yes, he was.
What did the Commission find?
So the Commission first of all noted that the employee in question had been physically and verbally aggressive on other occasions in the workplace previously.
And what's the significance of that?
The significance was that the conduct wasn't out of character.
So what did the Commission have to say about the alcohol?
So the Commissioner said something really interesting about the alcohol at paragraph 2 of the decision, and it's worth, I'm just going to read it out because I think it's really germane. Whilst in some circumstances an employer that provides alcohol at work functions and takes no steps to ensure it is consumed responsibly may be culpable for events attributable to the consumption of alcohol, such as a drunken employee being injured falling downstairs, employees who drink will also be held responsible for their own actions. The fact that someone has been drinking when they behave badly may in part explain their actions, but it should not be accepted as an excuse for that misbehaviour. How much alcohol one drinks is a choice they make, and that choice comes with consequences. Society no longer readily accepts alcohol consumption as an excuse for bad behaviour, and certainly not for physical violence.
So from that I take it that both the employer and the employee may be responsible.
I think that's a fair description.
Was the dismissal found to be fair?
Yes, it was.
Right. So that takes us to the third case study.
It does, and this one is not a Fair Work Commission decision, but one from the State New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission, and it's an application by a union on behalf of a Mr McCaskill and the Department of the Attorney General and Justice.
And what was the citation?
It's 2014, it's NSWIR-COM, C-O-M-M, 1009.
And what happened in that case?
In this particular instance, the conduct fell into two categories. Firstly, there was conduct against other employees in the form of touching female employees inappropriately.
Employees plural?
Yes, there were 5 in total.
And the second type of conduct?
It concerned a breach of confidentiality in that the employee told, or the applicant told an employee her job application had been unsuccessful.
So what did the New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission find?
So firstly, it was satisfied that the conduct occurred and that the conduct breached the employer's code of conduct, as well as the dignity and respect policy, as well as state anti-discrimination legislation.
So the termination of employment was deemed fair?
No, it was found to be harsh.
Okay, so how is that possible?
There was another employee who had engaged in conduct of a similar kind, that is, inappropriate touching of female employees, 2 in total, at the same event, who was not dismissed.
So that issue was a lack of consistency?
Correct.
So what are the key issues that employers need to be mindful of?
I think the key thing for employers to be mindful of is to communicate their expectations, and that is that all these activities, whether they're part of an official work function or not, that the performance and conduct requirements of the employer still apply, that people must treat their colleagues with respect. I think the other thing that employers must have, if alcohol is available or if alcohol is being served or provided, that there must be a mechanism by which to control the amount of alcohol that is being consumed. A free-for-all will create a risk that doesn't need to exist, and second of all, it will also leave the employer exposed if it is that the employer needs to take action as a result of the conduct of the employee, bearing in mind that point. The employer may be responsible for the conduct even if the employer is unable to hold an employee accountable for the conduct.
Well, thank you, Stuart, for ruining Christmas.
You're very welcome, Daniel. I think the only way to conclude our discussion today is with a reading. I've selected a poem from this book. Perhaps you would like to read it.
There's something going on that we don't know about. A lot of people are saying that bad things are happening out there. A lot of people are talking about it. I'm not saying that, and I'm not a conspiracy person. I'm not going to say it because I'm not allowed to say it, because I want to be politically correct. I know nothing about it. The people truly get what's going on.
Daniel, that was beautiful and profound. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Stuart.
And thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Donald.